And moving on, we'll proceed to session A1, Financing the Transition to a Low-Carbon Economy. The speaker for this session will be joining us online, and please welcome Mr. Abayomi A. Alawode, Lead Financial Sector Specialist, Finance, Competitiveness and Innovation Global Practice, the World Bank. Please welcome Mr. Alawode for the presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First, let me start by thanking the World Grain Organization and the UN ESCAP for inviting me to participate in this important event. As we all know, this is a momentous period in our existence as human beings as we face this crisis of climate change and its impact on our lives and our livelihoods. So today, I would like to share a few thoughts with you about how we can finance the transition to a low carbon economy, which is the aspiration of many economies now around the world, given the impending doom of climate change. This event is coming at a timely point in time because we have the COP26 also happening next week. So today, I will say a few words about what COP means for going forward in terms of fighting climate change. I'm trying to move to the next slide. Can you see my slides over there? I'm not sure what you can see and what I can see.
Your slide is shown to our audience here. Thank you very much, Mr. Alawode.
All right. So can you see the disclaimer?
Yes.
All right. So I want to start by saying these are my views only and not necessarily the views of the World Bank. This is important because I may say a few things that my bosses may not agree with. So this is just to let you know that these are my own views. As I said, this is happening at a time when the IPCC just issued this report about climate change being widespread. It is rapid and it is intensifying. This is essentially a code red from the IPCC saying that we need to take action as soon as possible. And we are going to have to work much harder if we want to keep global warming to the 1.5 degrees that we have aspired towards. And as some of the speakers have mentioned before, we are seeing increasing frequency of extreme weather events that shows that the crisis is already here. We just need to appreciate that we need to move faster. And we cannot maintain business as usual. And if we are going to scale up our response to climate change, then we need a lot of money to make sure that our actions, our targets are accomplished. And as many of you in this event know, without money, many of our aspirations may not be accomplished. So how do we get the required financing to make sure that our climate goals are accomplished? The bad news is that we need trillions and trillions of dollars to make this happen. And the public sector that we've often relied on to bail us out cannot come up with the money. And indeed, in many countries, it has been estimated that the public sector can only trump up 10 to 15% of what is required. So we definitely need private capital to scale up climate finance. And in order to do this, we need to have concerted action on several fronts. And let me quickly run through some of those areas where I think we need to work together. First, there is this need for a long-term policy framework with clear targets in many countries. Now, people may wonder, why do you need to have a framework? Why do you need targets? In my view, targets are very important in helping to focus minds and galvanize people around common goals. And this is very important if you are going to identify specific concrete actions that have to be taken. And then you can begin to estimate how much money you require to implement whatever actions you've decided to undertake. So setting targets, even though it may be time consuming, is very useful in helping to focus minds and galvanize people around common goals. There have been a lot of comments made about data and the use of AI and other new fintech instruments to improve availability of data. This is very, very important, because if you have better data, then you can better identify where the emissions are taking place, identify the risks, and identify the opportunities. And once you have the opportunities and the risks identified, then finance becomes clearer in terms of what you require money to fund. For now, in many countries, you do not have clear data on emissions, on carbon footprints, so it's very difficult to identify what exactly is needed to be funded. Third, taxonomies. Taxonomies are, in many cases, lists of economic activities that qualify as green. And as you know better than I do, definition of green is controversial in many respects. But if you don't know what is green and what is not green, then it becomes difficult to channel resources into investments that will reduce our carbon footprints. So green taxonomies, which are being developed now in many countries, are very important in identifying what is green and what is not green, so that we can mobilize finance to target those activities that are green. And once you have the taxonomies, then you need to widen the range of instruments. We've talked about green bonds, and green bonds have become very popular, but we also need other kinds of instruments, equity, long-term risk capital, so that those who are coming up with new solutions to address the climate change can actually get the funding that they need. Then on the demand side, we need to understand where the emissions are coming from so that we can channel our financing appropriately. And here, there are some investments that will be greener than others. We need to understand why. And we also need to help industries and activities that are currently brown to be less brown, even if they are not completely green yet. And for doing this, we need to have a pipeline of projects, because in many cases, financiers and investors complain that they do not have a list of projects or enterprises in which they can invest. And if you can put together a reasonable pipeline working together, then we can finance green innovations, especially in emerging and developing countries, which are currently starved of funds. Finally, let me talk about capacity building. Knowledge is very important. And this conference is an example of sharing knowledge and lessons of experience so that we can better understand what the issues are. And if you understand what the issues are, we are better able to prioritize, select the right policies, and make the institutional changes that are required to move towards this goal of low carbon economies. Since I work with the World Bank, some of you may be wondering, what's the role for multilateral development banks like the World Bank? For us, we see our role in playing a catalytic function to mobilize additional private capital. And sometimes we pave the way, we clear the bushes, we go first to make sure that there's a track record of investment so that private capital can follow. And in many cases, we co-finance projects so that our money alongside private capital is actually funding solutions to the climate problem. But beyond money, we also work on policy and regulatory changes that will prevent an enabling environment for money to flow more freely. And if you have the right policy environment, in many cases, we've seen that the development of pipelines becomes easier. And at the end of the day, you can match the supply of funding to the available projects and enterprises that are green. But we're also putting our money where our mouth is. Many of our portfolios and projects are now low carbon or targeting low carbon investments. And by making these changes in our own portfolios, we want to set a good example for other investors out there. And finally, because we need to mobilize domestic capital in many cases, we are also helping many of our client countries to develop domestic capital markets. Let me finish by giving you a specific example, which is close to home over there in Hong Kong, where recently we worked with the China Ministry of Finance and the CDM Fund, the Clean Development Mechanism Fund, to set up what we call a Green Finance Demonstration Project, which used $200 million from the World Bank as initial capitalization, and we're using this to mobilize additional capital from private investors. And one key feature of this project is that 60% of the investments will go to green SMEs. And even though there's involvement of government agencies, we reached agreement that it will be managed by an external fund manager with an independent governance structure where decisions will be made independently of the project sponsors. And there will be good practices implemented in screening projects and selecting projects, monitoring, impact evaluation, and so forth. And finally, since a theme of this project is ESG, this project will have robust environmental and social management systems to make sure that we do not have unforeseen contingencies or unintended consequences of the project. Many people assume that if a project is green, then it means that it doesn't harm the environment. But our experience shows that this is not true. So you need to be constantly aware to be able to assess and manage the risks that are associated with those kind of projects. So with these few words, I wanted to motivate the discussions that will happen during this event. And I wish you all very fruitful discussions. And I look forward to participating in other sessions. And thank you very much again for inviting me. Over.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alawode, for your presentation. Thank you. Now we'll move on to the second session. Climate-related financial risk. Are European banks and regulators ready? Now please welcome our online speaker, Mr. Alper Aras, former Regional Advisor of Macroeconomic Policy and Financing for Development Division, United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific, UNESCAP. Please welcome Mr. Aras.
Thank you very much for inviting me for this meeting. My subject is a little bit technical, but I try to explain in a simple way. In this regard, in my speech, I will first give basic information about the Basel regulation in order to understand the issues related to the integration of climate-related risk into the banking risk and their management. Later, I will explain the reservations of the bank regulators regarding the integration of this climate risk, supporting and penalizing factors, and the arguments put forward against these reservations. Then I explain the steps taken by European banks and the regulators. Based on this, I will evaluate whether European banks and the regulators are ready for the integration of climate risk. Let's start by giving some basic information about the Basel regulation. Basel regulations generally include regulations on measuring and managing risk. In this framework, risk in Basel regulations are classified as credit risk, market risk, operational risk, and liquidity risk. How to calculate this risk is clearly explained in Pillar 1 of the Basel regulation. In addition, Pillar 1 includes that allows banks to calculate their risk by using predetermined standard risk weights. This is called the standardized approach. The other method is the advanced measurement method. In this method, banks calculate their risk by using parametric or non-parametric regressions. For example, for credit risk, logistic regressions are generally used by using big data sets. On the other hand, risk that cannot be measured is evaluated under the Pillar 2. For example, since reputational risk cannot be quantified within the scope of Pillar 1, It is determined subjectively by supervisors relying on their experience and within the framework of the results of the stress test. Since the determination of this risk is based on the subjective decisions, it is very difficult to decide whether banks should increase their capital within the framework of Pillar 2. For this to happen, the regulatory authorities must be independent, the country's legal system allows this, and you must have highly qualified supervisors. Since banks cannot quantify climate risk at the moment, they have to evaluate it within the scope of Pillar 2. However, its effectiveness is debatable, as I mentioned. On the other hand, in Basel regulations, disclosure conditions were regulated in Pillar 3 in order to ensure market discipline. The importance of Pillar 3 for banks is more related to reputational risk. But in a world where communication and social media are developing, you can easily manipulate your reputational risk with a good social media consultant. We can say that banks have managed climate risk within the scope of Pillar 3 until now. However, Pillar 1 has the strongest tool that facilitate to manage the climate risk and the climate change. But the regulators produce various excuses not to use these tools. Before examining these excuses of regulators, let's look at how climate risk drivers can turn into banking risk. The studies have shown that 1.5 centigrade temperature increase will shape 8% of global GDP by 2100. These developments pose potential challenges for nearly everybody and most certainly for banks and the financial system. In this regard, financial institutions are exposed to climate change mainly through two different sets of climate risk drivers. These are physical and the transition risk. For example, in physical risk, banks may suffer the economic costs and the financial losses resulting from the increasing frequency of extreme weather events. In the transition risk, for example, as jurisdictions seek to address climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, their efforts may generate transition risks in this way. In this regard, physical and the transition risk manifest themselves in the form of credit, market, and liquidity risk or other banks risk. In this regard, by considering the impact of climate change on bank risk, prudential policy or Basel Accords need to be adjusted to account for the impact of climate-related risk on the safety and the soundness of financial institutions as a part of the core mandate of supervisory authorities. Moreover, I think that this adjustment in prudential regulations should contribute to facilitate the transition by providing incentives for a more climate-friendly allocation of financial resources. In this regard, regulators would need to consider supplementary action through modification to Pillar 1 instrument, Pillar 2 requirements, or Pillar 3 disclosure obligations. At this stage, although Pillar 1 is very effective, regulators don't want to play with risk weights. This is because, for example, physical risk may evolve over much longer time horizons than the 12-month time frame typically used to measure capital adequacy under the current Basel framework. Since the existing exposure will expire until the physical risk occurs, they don't find it appropriate to increase risk weights related to these exposures. This perspective includes only effect of climate change on banks. It doesn't cover that the bank's climate change aggravating policies that will adversely affect the banks again. In this framework, the perspective of bank regulators need to be changed. Second, it is implied that it wouldn't be appropriate to manipulate risk weights as green technologies are likely to evolve or government policies will reduce them until physical risk occurs. But risk is playing a gamble on these uncertainties. Another problem is that banks using advanced methods don't have enough data to convert climate-related risk into financial risk. For example, banks using the advanced method use approximately 50,000 or more data for one independent variable to calculate their credit risk. On the other hand, it is argued that if companies with large carbon footprint are punished by playing with risk weights, these companies will not be able to find resources to reduce their carbon footprints. But within this framework, loans can only be given under condition that these credits are used only to reduce carbon footprint activities. On the other hand, it is claimed that reducing risk weights in order to encourage green investment will cause green bubble or disrupt financial stability. However, expansionary monetary policy implemented by developed countries for many years has already caused a bubble in many countries. So far, central banks have performed very well in managing them. Putting forward such argument for climate risk that have potential to affect human life reveals that the seriousness of the issue isn't fully understood. In this context, given the long time horizon of the relevant climate risk scenarios, the regulators argue that in the face of these uncertainties, supervisors can use their subjective assessment and ask banks to increase their regulatory capital when necessary in return for climate risk. However, as I mentioned before, it is very difficult to conduct the Pillar 2 in this context, especially in developing and developed countries. For many years, banks used only the Pillar 3 tool to manage climate risk. Although Pillar 3 is a must for risk reduction and management for climate risk, it isn't sufficient by itself. If it were enough anyway, the Basel arrangement would only consist of Pillar 3. In this context, we can look at whether the European banks and regulatory authorities are ready for managing risk. The European Central Bank sees climate risk as a type of cross-cutting risk and driving force of other traditional risk categories. To manage cross-cutting risk, banks must integrate climate-related risk into all their management process. In this regard, since the internal credit risk model of banks are run using historical data, scenario analysis should be added to these models. In order to gain forward-looking perspectives, However, a certain amount of time has to pass with regard to determination of scenario analysis of stress test and the determination of common principles. On the other hand, since climate risk has been mostly evaluated within the framework of credit risk until now, it is also necessary to clearly determine how climate risk affects other risks, such as operational and the market risk, and how these risks affect with each other. It is especially important for banks using advanced risk methods. But before that, regulators and banks need to deal with data problems related to climate-related risk. The following example can be given better to explain the data problem. When Basel II was published, banks were given a 10-year data collection period on this risk so that banks could use advanced operational risk models. After the data problem, a certain time is also needed to develop model process. For standardized bank, it is stated that risk weights will change by integrating ESG factors by external credit rating agencies. However, uncertainty remains for the situation of countries that will determine their risk weights without using external credit rating agencies. This situation may also disrupt the competition between banks using advanced method and banks using standardized method. Because due to the data problem, banks using advanced method couldn't set aside capital for their climate risk for a long time if the capital of these banks aren't increased through Pillar 2. In this framework, European banks will reflect the climate-related risk through the internal capital adequacy assessment process qualitative. European Central Bank states that they expect it to become quantitative as the data problem is resolved. This means that banks only exercise to understand the climate risk, and European Central Bank doesn't expect banks to change their regulatory capital until the data problem is resolved. In this context, I predict that Pillar 1 and the Pillar 2 will only be fully operational in 10 years. And European Central Bank plans to run climate-focused supervisory stress tests in 2022 in accordance with the Pillar 2. However, it is also announced that the results of the stress test obtained within this framework will not affect the capital requirements of the banks. Instead, it is announced that supervisors will provide feedback to the banks on the results of this test. Regarding the green supporting loan penalizing factors, Bank of England officials state that it is too early to make decisions on this issue. European Union supervisory authorities, on the other hand, think that supporting or penalizing factors are not needed since the green asset ratio is introduced as a disclosure requirement. In this context, I can say that European Supervisory Authority and Bank are just starting to integrate climate-related risk into their banking risk. I estimate that it will take 10 years for this integration to be fully completed. On the other hand, European Central Bank and Bank for International Settlement officials have a perspective that they consider the effect of climate risk only bank risk. However, they don't consider the impact of banks' climate change accelerating activities on bank risks in their risk assessment. For this reason, they don't favor the inclusion of supporting and penalizing factors in bank regulations. This perspective explains why banks have not started to integrate this climate-related risk into their banking risk beforehand. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ras, for the presentation. Thank you very much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, joining us on the stage next, we have our next speaker, which is for the third session, with the topic, Stage the Green Exchange. Please welcome on stage Ms. Grace Hui, Head of Green and Sustainable Finance, Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing Limited, to share on this topic. Please welcome on stage Ms. Grace Hui.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be standing here giving you an update on HKEX's Green and Sustainable Stock Exchange stage, which we launched last year. Before that, I would like to remind the audience why we created Stage and to share with you all HKEX's initiatives, as well as the initiatives of the Cross-Agency Steering Group. Some of you may recall in May this year, BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager and the biggest force in ESG investing, voted against two Berkshire Hathaway directors, the directors of its audit and governance committees. And it voted with shareholders on requirements that the company produce a climate report and its holding companies produce diversity reports. BlackRock singled out Berkshire Hathaway, a step it takes with only a select group of companies in its annual investment stewardship report, as a company that left it with no choice but to vote against management. Being sustainable today is not negotiable. COVID reminded us the importance of our relationship with nature and the importance of treating nature with respect. As the UK Environmental Secretary put it, the loss of biodiversity and climate change are two sides of the same coin. One of the most important topics in corporate sustainability is the dramatic increase in attention by investors on the integration of environmental social governance considerations. Companies with the strongest ESG practices relative to their peers are by definition higher quality companies. They are more profitable, have less volatile earnings, and according to research from MSCI, are better at mitigating serious business risk that can lead to large financial losses and bankruptcies. As a result, they tend to provide enhanced reduction of downside risk in times of market stress. Global efforts to address climate change are broadening, deepening and accelerating. Over 125 countries now have net zero emissions commitments, including China, the European Union, and Japan. And the Biden administration is committed to building a clean energy economy in the US by 2035. There has also been an increasing regulatory push. All relevant sectors, including banks, asset managers, and insurers, will increasingly be expected to manage climate risks and realize the enormous opportunities from the transition, which will involve virtually every sector of the economy. Hong Kong is known around the world as a leading financial center. In many areas of financial services, Hong Kong has a track record, reputation, and scale to be considered among the world's best, including having the largest asset management market in Asia and the largest offshore liquidity pool for renminbi in the world. So we should cement our position to also become the regional green finance fundraising center. The recent policy address by our CEO of Hong Kong to develop Hong Kong into a green finance center, the Climate Action Plan 2050, published by our Environmental Bureau earlier this month, outlining the strategies and targets for combating climate change and achieving carbon neutrality, coupled with the fact that the central government has designated Hong Kong as the green finance hub of the Greater Bay Area, all help to support our position and aspiration to become the green finance center here in Asia. Now on to HKEX's initiatives to support this development. HKEX's journey in ESG actually started over 8 years ago, and ESG has been core to our purpose as both a market operator and a market regulator, as well as a listed corporate since then. As a regulator, we first introduced ESG disclosure requirements in 2013, and we have made changes to our rules every 2 years to keep pace with market development and investors' demand. A recent amendment to require a new mandatory statement from the board setting out the board's consideration of ESG matters has become a pioneer of ESG disclosure in Asia. We want our boards to incorporate ESG strategy into their overall corporate strategy. We also require a new disclosure on climate-related issues. We know that climate change has the potential to profoundly change the physical world in which we live, and companies must strengthen their management of climate-related financial risks. We want companies to look at setting targets in relation to environmental KPIs. The overall focus is on board leadership and accountability of ESG risks. Last December, HKEX launched a brand new platform called Stage, which stands for Sustainable and Green Exchange. It is Asia's first multi-asset sustainable investment product platform. Our objective is to support the fast-growing global demand for sustainable finance. At the heart of the Stage platform is an online product repository, which as of today features 78 sustainable theme products from leading Asian corporates. Over time, we hope to increase the scope of the product repository to other asset classes, industry in Hong Kong and beyond. Stage is also an online repository of green and sustainable finance resources, promoting market education, knowledge sharing, and stakeholder engagement in sustainable finance. We believe in the importance of financial education and ESG risk awareness building to support both corporates and investors' transition to a low-carbon future. I'm very pleased to share with you that Stage has been successful in attracting green finance issuances. As of December last year, there were only 18 or ESG-related green bonds listed on our exchange, which was our record high, amounting to 66 billion Hong Kong dollars. However, in the first 9 months of this year, we have already surpassed that record to 73, raising more than 185 billion Hong Kong dollars. I wanted to stress that issuers included on stage do not need to pay any fees. However, they must provide additional voluntary disclosures on their sustainable investment products, such as use of proceeds and annual positions reports. These reports are typically reviewed by independent accountants or certifiers. These certifications are also posted on stage for public review. This additional information will help alleviate investors' concern on greenwashing, an important objective for stage. Now I want to talk about the initiatives by the Cross-Agency Steering Group. As you may know, our Hong Kong Monetary Authority and the Securities and Futures Commission has set up a cross-agency steering group with stakeholders at the top of the left-hand side, including HKEX. These stakeholders will coordinate the management of climate and environmental risks to the financial sector, accelerate the growth of green and sustainable finance in Hong Kong, and to support the government's climate strategies. The steering group has been running for over 16 months now, and a number of concrete steps have been announced as a result of such great collaboration and coordination. I should not go into the strategic plan that was announced last year, which you can find on the stage website, but suffice to say that there have been developments that are going to support what is going to come out in COP26. For example, in July, the steering group announced its priorities to focus on climate-related disclosures and sustainability reporting. It also talked about the carbon market opportunities, as well as the launch of a new center for green and sustainable finance. The Center for Green and Sustainable Finance is a cross-sector platform which coordinates the efforts of financial regulators, government agencies, industry stakeholders, and academia in capacity building, thought leadership, and policy development. The Center has established working groups to develop strategies and roadmaps to promote capacity building and develop data repository and analytics capability. One of the areas in the cross-agency steering group's strategic plan is to capitalize on the opportunities presented by the mainland to develop Hong Kong into a green finance center in the Greater Bay Area. In order to achieve this, we agreed to advance financial cooperation with the mainland to strengthen collaboration with the GBA authorities and to explore the development of a carbon market. Therefore, a new work stream under the cross-agency steering group was set up to assess the feasibility of developing Hong Kong as a regional carbon trading center to strengthen such collaboration. This slide shows the drivers and benefits of carbon markets. Real economy companies are being pushed by governments, regulations, investors, and activists to address carbon emissions. Putting a price on carbon reduces emissions and the costs associated with these emissions. Some countries, however, use carbon tax, and some use cap-and-trade systems. Nevertheless, an effective carbon price signal is very important for investors. In addition to encouraging investment in low-carbon generation, a carbon price provides investors an incentive to pursue other low-carbon activities, such as tilting portfolios away from high-carbon investments, as they have a clearer view of the economic cost of holding high-carbon assets. Without an effective price signal, the same incentives do not exist, and investments get delayed or cancelled. There are two major types of carbon trading schemes. The compliance market, known as the emissions trading scheme, is where covered entities received free allowances from competent authorities or obtain allowances through auctions. The other is the voluntary carbon market, which allows carbon emitters to offset the unavoidable emissions by purchasing carbon credits emitted by projects targeted at removing or reducing greenhouse gas emission from the atmosphere. The 14th Five-Year Plan stipulates formulation of an action plan to peak carbon emissions before 2030 and adoption of stronger policy measures in an effort to reach carbon neutrality before 2060. In this context, China's emission trading scheme will be an important market-based tool to help the country achieve its climate goals and energy transition. I just wanted to highlight that last year, China's combined traded volume and value of carbon trading reached 135 megatons, the third highest among major global markets. The regional ETSs in China, which cover major emitting sectors within their region, have their own emission allowances, which can vary dramatically in average price. There are two pilots in the Greater Bay Area, Guangdong and Shenzhen, both of which have been operating since 2013, and as such have gained substantial experiences. Prior to the national scheme that was launched in July, the Guangdong ETS was the largest of the Chinese 8 pilots. It covers sectors accounting for more than 70% of the province's emissions. It had consistently been the most active among all the regional ETSs, with 32 million tons of traded volume last year. The Shenzhen ETS is one of the most active regional markets in China, despite its relatively small size compared to other pilots. By the end of last year, Shenzhen's cumulative trading volume and turnover amounted to more than 58 million tons. China's national scheme came into operation and trading in July this year, with the power sector being included initially, before being expanded to cover the other 7 energy-intensive sectors. Even in this initial phase, it is already the world's largest emission trading scheme in terms of coverage, covering coal and gas-fired power plants that are responsible for over 40% of China's carbon emission from fossil fuel combustion. The China's national ETS would be worth $800 million in the first year, but would grow rapidly to as much as $25 billion by 2030. The feasibility study I mentioned is still being conducted between the SFC and HKEX. I do not wish to gun jump on what the outcome may look like. Suffice to say that Hong Kong and China's net zero commitments drive pressure for companies to voluntarily set their net zero strategies and targets. The access to carbon offsets and derivatives is crucial to cover their unabated emissions on their pathway to net zero. I hope to share more with you in the near future. In conclusion, sustainability will play a larger part in driving growth in economies post-COVID. Governments are already announcing high shares of fiscal spending dedicated towards sustainability goals. Private capital will play the decisive role in funding the $3+ trillion in annual investment required for the next 30 years. Soon it will become increasingly clear which companies are on the right or wrong side of climate history. Companies that are slow to adapt their operations will risk being left behind, with decreased valuation and diminishing access to capital. Therefore, the opportunity to create real value by helping companies transition from where they are to where they need to be is massive. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much to Ms. Grace Ho for the presentation. Thank you, and please be seated. Next, ladies and gentlemen, please join me and welcome our next speaker. And we have Mr. Paul Wong, Chief Executive Officer of Almighty Worldwide Limited, and he'll be sharing on sustainable lighting solutions, the role of Green Fund. Please welcome Mr. Paul Wong.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Paul Wong, CEO of Almighty Worldwide Limited. Thank you for the World Green Organization's invitations. It gives me the chance to introduce the sustainable lighting system, which is one of the major important elements in the infrastructure in the smart city. Nowadays, lighting systems consume about 20% of global electrical power. Although LED technology has found applications successfully, it is still not widespread in outdoor public lighting applications. Traditional Energy Star concept, which focus only on energy saving. The sustainable lighting technology proposed here deviates from the traditional Energy Star concept. It stressed a new principle that includes three major factors. The first factor is energy saving, and this is the only factor that Energy Star concept focuses on. The other factor of sustainable lighting technology is long product lifetime, and the third factor is the recyclability of the product material. Why LED technology is still not widespread in outdoor public lighting applications? According to the research by the United States Department on Energy in 2013, statistics of failure rate, which based on 5,400 sets outdoor LED lighting systems and 34 million working hours, found the major failure of LED systems are due to the problem of the LED driver. This credible research highlights the actual bottleneck of LED technology in outdoor public lighting lies in the driver aspect. The high failure rate of driver mainly because that they use electrolytic capacitor and integrated circuit in the circuit are susceptible of temperature or humidity and lightning. It results in outdoor LED lighting system failure, making high maintenance costs and a large amount of electronic waste. So what can we do? We cooperate with the University of Hong Kong and we invent the passive LED driver. This LED driver is currently the world's first only product that can meet the concept of sustainable lighting technology. Sorry. You can see the perceptive image of our driver. This driver has several special features. First, this is long lifetime. It can work for 10 years, over 10 years. And the structure is very simple. It's made by less than 20 pieces component. And there's no electrolytic capacitor and integrated circuit use. And it's very reliable. It can operate under extreme climate and strong resistance against induced voltage caused by thundering. And our driver is recyclable because over 80% of the components are recyclable. And our driver is also energy saving. The energy saving rate is greater than 60%, and the driver has a power energy efficiency over 90%. And the sustainable lighting technology and our passive LED driver won many honorable awards. In 2015, we won the IEEE William E. Nobel Power E-Electronics Award. In 2018, we won the prize and a gold medal in the Geneva International Exhibition of Inventions. And also in that year, we won the Hong Kong Green Innovation Award in Hong Kong Environmental Excellence Award. Let's see, this is the photo we take on the application of our sustainable lighting solution. Since 2015, in Guangdong, Jiangmen, Hanson City, we installed the street light with passive LED driver. And since 2016, we start a tax scheme with Hong Kong Highway Department in the street light with passive LED driver instead of. And in 2018 and 2020, with the support of Electrical and Mechanical Service Department, we start the tax scheme with floodlight use passive LED driver in Sa Tin and Airport Police Station. After we passed the tax scheme of Highways Department in 2021, we start the pilot scheme with the Hong Kong Highways Department in Tai Po Market, in Tai Po Industrial Estate. Thank you for listening. This is my brief introduction to the passive LED driver. And my partner, Cyril Guan, is the fund manager of the United Sustainable Fund. And he will continue to demonstrate the business model of the sustainable lighting system and the use of the Green Fund. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paul Wong. Please be seated. And now, another gentleman will be coming on stage to further elaborate on the content Mr. Paul Wong just left us with.
Thank you, Paul. Hello, everyone. It's my honor to be here to demonstrate why the energy saving is not equal to the sustainable lighting system. Just continue the PowerPoint. Yes, this one. Okay, let me show you the numbers in energy saving. In Hong Kong, most of the outdoor lighting systems are using 400-volt high-pressure sodium lamp. According to the LCP rate, it is equal to 1.218 Hong Kong dollars per unit. The electricity fee is around 2,200, 22-something Hong Kong dollars for one pieces per year. When we change into the LED lamp, we can use the 200-volt and also no electricity loss. Therefore, the electricity fee can reduce to 890-something. The saving rate is 60%. However, many of the people ignore about the maintenance costs. We use the figures of Hong Kong government. It applies to every Hong Kong government project. For the high-pressure sodium lamp, the lamps, lanterns, and the power drivers is around $2,950. However, for one-time maintenance cost, it's around 10,000 Hong Kong dollars. Why the maintenance cost is so high? It is because For safety reason, Hong Kong government requires 4 workers and 1 tower wagon to operate the repairman. Therefore, you can see the maintenance cost occupy around 76.84%. For the LED switching mode, the lamps, lanterns, and the power drivers is around 5,000 Hong Kong dollars. And the maintenance cost is a little bit higher, it's also around 10,000 Hong Kong dollars. Therefore, the maintenance cost percentage can reduce to 64.89%. For the LED with passive driver, of course, the power driver is more expensive, but the maintenance cost is around 10,000 Hong Kong dollars only. Therefore, the maintenance cost occupies around 57.89%. However, you can see that the maintenance cost at least half of the total impairment, the total cost of the repairment. So for the carbon footprint, we have to use the product life cycle concept we assume the outdoor lighting system lasts for 10 years. We can see that for the high-pressure sodium lamp, the estimated lifetime is around 3 years. It is due to the lamp failure. Therefore, we can estimate 4 lamp sets are required for 10 years. For the LED switching mode driver, the estimated lifetime is also 3 years. Although you will say that, the warranty period of some famous brand name is 5 years, but they only concern about who pay the repairman cost. But the carbon footprint still exists. Typically, there's only 8,000 hours in conventional LED drivers. Therefore, 4 namesets also required for 10 years. However, for LED with passive driver, the lifetime can be more than 10 years. There is a certificate MTTF report of at least 60,000 hours lifetime, which is conducted by the 5th Electronic Research Institute of MIIT. Therefore, the warranty period of the passive driver is also 10 years. Therefore, only 1 lamp set is required for 10 years, the working environment. Therefore, you can imagine more carbon emissions when more lamp sets is required. Carbon emissions is generated from manufacturing the lamp set and also from the maintenance task. Therefore, we use the Green Private Equity Fund, United Sustainable Fund, to change this model. We create a win-win situation by using the sustainable fund. The night owner, for example, the government, can benefit from lower initial investment. For the operator, can generate the income from lower maintenance costs. Most important, the investor can enjoy the higher return from the sustainable fund. Also, for the green fund, we have to avoid the greenwash. Therefore, we have to make sure the projects we invest can fulfill the sustainable development goals. We can generate the quantified green impact and also to issue the green audit report. We are so lucky to have WGO as our green auditor. And also for the green impact, I want to emphasize, we are discussing with some scholars. We are discussing with some scholars to study about how this sustainable lighting system can obtain the internationally recognized carbon credit, such as CER from Gold Standard and also the VCS. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much once again to Mr. Kwan and Mr. Wong from Almighty Worldwide Limited. Now may I invite all of you to put your hands together and welcome Mr. Poon Kwok Ying, Raymond, JP, Deputy Director, Regulatory Services, Electrical and Mechanical Services Department, Hong Kong SAR, to come on stage and give us a speech. Please welcome Mr. Raymond Poon.
Dr. William Yu, guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I only have a small, short speech. I don't have any PowerPoint to show. It is my great pleasure to join this conference, which is very meaningful. And many of you joining this conference are investors and asset managers around the world. And I'm sure you are familiar with the ESG, environmental, social, and governance investing. Today, I would like to share another ESG, which is evolution, sustainable development, and green goals in co-creating our future. E for evolution. The Hong Kong government has accorded top priority to building a greener and livable low-carbon city. As you might have noticed that the government has just announced that the Hong Kong's Climate Action Plan 2050 earlier this month, to set out more proactive strategies and measures for decarbonization in Hong Kong. In the evolution towards carbon neutrality before 2050, there are 4 major decarbonization strategies, namely net zero electricity generation, energy saving and green buildings, green transport, and waste reduction. Green finance and green innovation could speed up the transitions for deeper decarbonization. The set S for sustainable development of my ESG. To demonstrate the government's support in promoting sustainable development, Hong Kong has launched the first government green bond program in 2019. As at July of this year, the government has successfully issued green bonds totaling $3.5 billion under this program. This multi-tranche green bond has attracted a diverse group of investors from Asia, Europe, and US. Building on this good momentum, within the next 5 years, the government plans to expand the scale of green bond program to totaling $25 billion and issue retail green bonds. Hong Kong would position as a premier green finance hub, regionally and internationally. The proceeds raised under this program are to finance government's public works projects with environmental benefits. The total proceeds for the bond issued in 2019, amounting to $1 billion, have been allocated to 7 public works projects. One of the examples is a waste-to-energy project mentioned in the Climate Action Plan. The integrated waste management facilities in an artificial island near Sai Gu Zhou. Upon completion in 2025, the facility will eliminate greenhouse gas emission of about 440,000 tons and produce electricity for use by 100,000 households in Hong Kong per year. Another example I would like to highlight is the district cooling system in Kai Tak development, which is one of the measures also mentioned in the Climate Action Plan. This development is a large-scale centralized air conditioning system, providing chilled water to multiple buildings in Kai Tak area through the underground water pipework. The whole development is expected to be completed in 2028 with an expected energy saving for use by 28,000 households and annual carbon emission reduction of nearly 100,000 tons. The government will continue to invest in a series of environmental projects, such as district cooling system in new development areas, large-scale waste-to-energy facilities, and green transportation, etc. And finally, the G for green goals of my ESG. Hong Kong moving towards carbon neutrality before 2050. There are a number of intermediate green goals in zero carbon energy and renewable energy, also electricity savings in buildings, and green transport and waste reduction. We need to enlist full support of all sectors, including finance, engineering, and the public, in achieving the green goals. Let's work collaboratively to achieve carbon neutrality before 2050 and to co-create solutions for our sustainable future, like the digital portal for UN PPP projects and the Green Fund for Smart City Technology and Development launched in this conference, which are very meaningful and for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Poon. Please be seated. Thank you. Next, we will invite another officiating guest of the session. Please welcome Ms. Grace Hui, Head of Green and Sustainable Finance, Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing Limited, to the stage and give us a speech. Please welcome Ms. Grace Hui.
Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. Since the topic is about smart city development and technology application, so my really short speech will circle around that so that the panel can have a more fruitful discussion. We're living in the century of cities. Today, more than half of the global population lives in urban areas, and they account for more than 70% of global carbon emissions. With 90% of the world's urban area coastlines, cities face the risk of devastating climate change impacts, such as rising sea levels and powerful coastal storms. The urge for cities to address climate change and limit global warming coincides with the proliferation of new technology, from artificial intelligence to big data, which can help cities become more livable, resilient, and better able to respond to challenges. In fact, the Exponential Climate Action Roadmap released at the Global Climate Action Summit back in 2018 pointed out that the importance of digital technology to emissions reduction. Solutions in energy, manufacturing, agriculture, and land use, building, services, transportation, and traffic management, particularly 5G, the Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence, can help reduce global carbon emissions by up to 15%. Smart city plays an important role in the urbanization trend to facilitate the sustainable growth of society and increase quality of living. It leverages technologies as well as human and social capital to enhance the efficiency of city operation and management, from promoting installation of electric vehicle charging facilities and provision of smart water meter system, to exploring application of Internet of Things sensors to enhance environmental hygiene. Green and digital technologies can be applied to all aspects of the development of smart cities to create a low-carbon and more sustainable environment. The Hong Kong government strives to develop the city into a new hub for smart and green technology. The recent Climate Action Plan 2050 suggested smart initiatives the government is working on to support smart city development in order to decarbonize the city. These include the launch of the pilot program on smart recycling systems in September 2020 to test in phases the local application of smart recycling facilities connected by Internet of Things technology, as well as retro-commissioning and building-based smart technologies to enhance energy saving management and energy efficiency of buildings and infrastructure. To limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees C, we need to maximize technologies at different levels of development: cloud computing, first-generation industrial automation, and 3G and 4G mobile networks, among others, already serve as a foundation for big efficiency gains. Next come 5G, AI, Internet of Things, and drones, which all depend on connectivity and open up completely new opportunities. With the right policy and strong climate leadership, these technologies will be instrumental to moving society towards a circular and lean economy, focused on growing service value while reducing waste and pollution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hui. Please remain on stage. We're going to invite you for a group photo, followed by a kickoff ceremony. Please remain on stage, and I'll be inviting our other officiating guests to come on stage again. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our officiating guests, including Mr. Raymond Poon, Ms. Grace Hui, Mr. Paul Wong, and Dr. William Yu. Please welcome them back onto the stage, first of all for a group photo. Now, when our guests are ready, you may now proceed to the center of the stage and we'll have a photo together. We're very delighted to have so many guests with us today, and we're going to have a kickoff ceremony after this photo. So now, with our staff, please have the props ready on stage, and we'll invite our officiating guests here to kick off the session for us. All right, on my count of 3, I would like to invite our officiating guests to put the board onto the props to signify the kickoff of today's session here. All right, please get ready. On my count, let's have a photo first, and on my count, we'll do the kickoff together. All right, please get ready. 3, 2, 1. You may now place the boards on the props in front of you at the front. All right, thank you very much. All right, let's have one more photo together. And please continue to remain on stage. Now we're going to invite our panelists to come on stage to join the photo. Please welcome Ms. Kashi Lau, BBS, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, BCT Group. Please welcome. We also have Mr. Wallace Lam, Managing Director and Deputy Head of Institutional Banking Group, DBS Hong Kong Limited. Mr. Cyril Kwan, Chief Operating Officer, Innovest Asset Management Limited and Fund Manager, United Sustainable Fund. Please welcome. And we have Dr. Sharat Chopra, Assistant Professor, School of Energy and Environment, City University of Hong Kong. Please welcome on stage. All right, a few more photos together. All right, thank you very much once again. And with our panelists, please remain on stage and our officiating guests can be seated. Thank you very much. All right, next we're going to have Dr. William Yu to be our moderator, and he'll be joined by our panelists to discuss on the topic ESG investing, investment for good. Now, when we get the stage ready, I'm going to invite our panelists here on stage again. Followed by the panel discussion session, there will be a Q&A session. So if our audience here would have questions, you can feel free to raise. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panelists here on stage again, Ms. Kashi Lau, Mr. Wallace Lam, Mr. Cyril Kwan, and Dr. Sharat Chopra. Please welcome. Dr. William Yu will be moderating off stage here and be seated. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and we'll kick off the panel discussion session.
Hey,
Okay, now over to you, Dr. Yu.
thank you. Okay, so it's a section about investment for good. Okay, followed by the previous section we talk about the smart city development. It's all relevant. So how our investment can go to some meaningful green projects to avoid greenwashing, and also to follow some established standard based on some scientific methodologies. I think we have an expert here on the stage to go into details. Okay, so maybe to warm up, lady first.
Thank you.
So Ms. Lau Kasi, the CEO of BCT Group. So BCT Group is one of the largest pension fund service provider in Hong Kong. So you are managing the wealth of many people, right? So what are the global trends as well as the local consideration for your investment strategy? How are you going to make good use of the money you receive? Maybe long-term, low risk, or stable return? what are the optimal combinations in an investment portfolio? Maybe Cassie can share with us.
It's a very long question. Now, I have some information from sources from JP Morgan. They do have the Sustainable Investment Hub. Now, of course, you have heard this all morning about the trends. ESG is irreversible, okay? So it's a big trend globally as well as locally. Okay, you heard from Secretary Chris Hoy as well. Now, let me talk about, maybe a few trends in ESG. So I will address some of the questions asked. Okay. Now, are consumers driving it as well? Yes, consumers are voting with their wallet. Okay. So they ask questions about, would you buy from companies that really care about environmental protection? Surprisingly, it is. China, among the countries being interviewed for this question, China has the highest, 71%, okay? They are environmentally inclined in the consumer behavior. But so it's a positive shift for companies to support environmental protection. Now, the other countries range from about 31% to 61%. Where does Hong Kong rank? Unfortunately, the lowest score of 31%. But don't be discouraged. It will go up, okay? Another trend is, so this individual are driving government to set goals. So the second trend is government, regulators, second trend. So you heard about from Hong Kong Exchange, EQ, and EX. So policymakers are setting environmental and social goals. As you all heard about this morning, being net zero, carbon zero by 2050. The European countries, the US, including Hong Kong. Even though, of course, but China, because of the effort they have to make, they talk about 2060. Even though it's only 10 years later, but you can see the effort being used, okay, to set the goals. Another trend we see is because the shift to sustainability is maybe a headwind for some industries, especially for traditional energy. They better really do have to account for much less than what they are doing now. So, for example, for renewables, they have to increase from currently 0.2% to 59%. While for coal, as you know, coal has been the center for a lot of controversies in the past decade. It's going from 30% to 2%. So they are setting, so it's not too late for companies to transition, energy transition. And ESG, billions create opportunities for those who are willing to change, because billions and billions of dollars are going into those energy transition. And so investment in ESG, they're not numbers. So many people talk about different numbers, but they're going to go from 33 billion investment in ESG to 501 billion, 500 billion. So it's 15 times more with really renewable energy as well, okay? So you see the interest will grow, expand. So that unique opportunity to tap the ESG market. So ESG covers more than climate, social and governance. So you see more governance being put on stage, and they're affecting the investment landscape, okay? So this morning, Chris talked about Hong Kong issuing bonds, right, green bonds. So globally, they have grown 25 times between 2016 and 2020, right? It's only 4 or 5 years. So that's why you will see that the E and S projects are going to increasingly have access to financing. So the investment market, the capital market is telling you that there are money there, but only for some special purposes. And the ESG is changing the nature of investment flows. And so with EU, the sustainable strategies, they're rising from 5 to 48%. For Asia Pacific, it's only from 0 to 6%. But as someone mentioned, Asia's strong need to catch up. Their only AUM account in Asia for sustainable assets is about 1%. It hasn't grown very much in recent years, but you see it's going to grow. So sustainable investment is become a compelling trend. And there are compelling vehicles for change worldwide. As much as talking about doing well financially, we are not talking about doing good. Okay, now in terms of investment, you say for pension, we definitely go for long term because pension are long term money. You talk about 30 to 50 years. So sustainable return are not necessarily low risk. So don't think that sustainable return means low risk, no return. No. It has to be, you have to take appropriate and reasonable risk in managing the money. So it is asset owners like ourselves who have the responsibility, the fiduciary duty for long-term growth. So for optimal combination, there's no magic bullet, there's no one size fits all. So we will say that depends on risk appetite of the different members of the pension scheme. And we must be very ready to incorporate ESG into the investment process, in the investment decision making, and not necessarily come up with ESG funds, sustainable funds. Because in order to produce those funds, there has to be buyers. So the public is still on the low end of the curve. So institutional investors, like pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, we're the one going to drive the market. So we will ask that all our fund managers, all the fund strategies, in addition to taking some, maybe the exclusionary mandate or some impact investing mandate, but generally it will be talking about integration. It's like a DNA for a fund manager to integrate that. So the MPFA, the regulators, the IOPS, international pension regulators, the SFC are now all making principles, enhanced disclosure. So it bodes well for Hong Kong and for the world.
Okay, so we need to catch up. We are looking for more and more impact investment for good cause. So I think we all agree we want to see more and more green projects, right? So bank, financial institution will play a very important role. So I would like to introduce Mr. Wallace Lam, the Managing Director of DBS Bank, DBS Hong Kong. To provide clients with green financial instrument, we now can hear about green loans, sustainability-linked loans, different types of instrument to finance the projects. Okay, are there any prerequisite or requirements for a client to obtain this kind of green financial instrument? And are there any advantages? Tell us the secret, okay, in using all these green facilities compared to the traditional arrangement?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think I would definitely agree that banks actually have a very important and critical role in pushing for sustainable financing, because we are sort of like the traffic controller. We direct capital flow. So obviously we recognize that we play a very critical role, and we have obviously in the past couple of years done a lot of things on this front. So when you ask, are there any prerequisites? I think for corporates, I think first and foremost, the most important thing for management of companies is to share the fact that this is a very important topic. It is real, climate change is real, and there is an urgency to act. There's no time to waste. And for companies that do not already have a policy or plan to transition towards more sustainable and green business model, I suggest they do now, because it is actually of very high urgency. And for companies that already have a genuine interest and desire to transition into more sustainable and green business models, first and foremost, management needs to spend time on it. Put in policies, right, that set and establish green and sustainable framework to guide the future operations. Then they need to look at projects. What are they trying to do? Anything in specific that they are trying to fund? Once the projects are identified, they need to go through obviously they will have suppliers, contractors that can provide them with certain certifications. But more importantly, they also need to engage third-party green authorities to provide a second opinion, right? Should they actually want to go for some green or sustainable financing, so to speak, in the market. These green authorities, there are actually a number of them in Europe, in the US, But for Hong Kong QAA is actually one of the green authorities that can actually do that job. And in the process, right, of getting a second opinion, there is certain due diligence, investigations, site visits that are potentially required, and that also takes management time. So management support and commitment to this is very important. So for a bank like DBS, we have dedicated resources and teams that can help our clients on every single step of the way in providing our green advisory services. So the next part of the question is whether there are benefits, right? I think it is actually quite hard to quantify, but quantitatively speaking, the most benefit could be by means of positive publicity. So when a company does something that is green or sustainable, they get more press coverage, right? Press publications like to report something that is green because it is something that attracts attention from the investor base. There are also, certain things I'd like to quote from a report done by ESG and Corporate Financial Performance. Apparently, 90% of companies with strong ESG profiles achieve equal or better financial performance than companies without. And also from a research from CDP, S&P 500 Climate Change Report, companies that actively plan with climate change in mind secure an 18% higher ROI than companies that do not. And other than from the benefit perspective, I also like to stress there's also an element from the risk perspective that companies to look at. Because every single time there's a disruptive technology being introduced to an industry, right? So let's say if you all believe in e-vehicles, for example, if you believe e-vehicles is going to be the future, let's say I have a client that manufactures components, right, of a combustion engine, like the piston or the crankshaft or the cylinders, right? Components that are critical to a combustion engine. And if in the future world, if combustion engine power cars are no longer going to be there, let's say in 20 years or 30 years, these companies that I bank with now will no longer have a business, right? And it happened before in our history. When, let's say, combustion engine cars were invented, the companies that did horse carriages went out of business, right? I mean, the same thing is going to happen. And if when we do credit assessment, right, for loans, facilities, consideration, etc., we will also take into the transition risk into account. So that's something that we also need to look at. And going forward, right? We heard from Secretary Hui. We looked at the policy address by our chief executive. There is a determination by Hong Kong to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, and I wouldn't be surprised if some regulations are going to be introduced, right, to make sure, to guide companies and banks towards that ultimate goal.
Thank you, Wallace. So you talk about the product future, the technology, as well as the related transition risk could apply to the regulatory change and also to the industry, a kind of paradigm shift in maybe consumer preference. And you also talk about carbon neutral. So my next question will go to Dr. Chopper from City University of Hong Kong, School of Energy and Environment. So you are expert in LCA, life cycle assessment, that related to products' carbon footprint. Okay, carbon neutral now is no longer a buzzword, okay? Over 120 countries already committed the carbon neutral targets, okay? So for business, how do you see like LCA, this kind of life cycle assessment tools can help the business to grow, to change, to transform, or even we want to promote all these products with low carbon features, right? Putting a good label on it. Is it difficult for a corporation to start? Very complicated calculation, I guess.
You're right, it is a complicated calculation, but the human impact on the environment is also complex. So when we're trying to quantify the impacts of human impact on the environment, it will become complicated. So that's all right. I think that we can deal with the complexity because we have all of these great minds in the room. If we apply these minds, we can come up with solutions. The question is, why do we need this? And that is a very important point. What we are referring to is the fact that how does one understand somebody is sustainable or not? In the business world, you guys have accounting, right? If you don't do accounting, you do not know if you're making a profit or a loss, if a business is doing well or not. The same way, we need to do accounting of environmental impacts to determine whether your products, your projects that you're talking about are truly sustainable, because intuitively, we might think that a project is sustainable or environmentally benign, but actually it might have deeper impacts. And to build on the point that Wallace was mentioning, we could depend on certification from third parties elsewhere in the world, but those impacts do not hold for Hong Kong, right? Because by the time they come, the reality of those technologies in Hong Kong is going to be different, and the impacts are going to be different. The performances in terms of their financial returns are going to be different. So we can't just simply rely on information that is, or certification that is done elsewhere. It has to be done for the local context to see whether there is a risk reduction opportunity or a profit-making opportunity while we are making sustainability decisions. So hence, the methodology is quite strong, quite popular, widely accepted. So I'd like to see more of the folks who are trying to make consistent decisions and allow comparison, right? Because ultimately, if a fund manager has to make a decision between two projects, how does one go about it? Of course, there's the financial aspect, but then there are also the sustainability aspect that one needs to look into. And for those kinds of data analytics, that's where life cycle assessment and other methodologies like this, I mean, I'm not saying that this is just one methodology, but accounting, the principle of accounting environmental impacts is very important.
Thank you, Dr. Chopper. So you mentioned about the fund manager, the role of fund manager. Okay, in front of two different projects, they need to make a good decision. So that's why I need to ask Mr. Cyril Guan, from InnoWest, and also the United Sustainable Fund, the IM of this fund. So based on your experience, how do you evaluate all these green projects, starting from where? And also, is it very difficult to set up a green fund in Hong Kong?
Thank you for your questions. United Sustainable Fund is a green private equity fund. We adopt a Hong Kong limited partnership format to set up this fund because we want to demonstrate 100% Hong Kong style in green fund. Nowadays, it's not easy to set up a green private equity fund. The major problem is certification. We cannot easily to evaluate the green impact in numbers. Not just like Dr. Chopper said, we cannot use the audit report to show the P&L, to show the assets and liabilities of the projects, like carbon emissions, something like that. Therefore, we spend a lot of time to study how to evaluate the green impact in numbers. We want to present in very easy and understandable green audit report to the investor. And also, we want to avoid the greenwash It is very important for the fund manager to make sure the project is really to get a positive green impact. We have discussed with some Hong Kong scholars like Dr. Chapo to try to obtain the carbon credit just like the CER by using the passive LED driver technology. I think this experience is very useful to many carbon neutral projects developers because I think they also face the same problems of the green certification. And also we want to demonstrate how the green project and the green finance collaboration. In coming, we will study different outdoor lighting system, the applications, and also we hope we can encourage the applications of sustainable lighting system in the world in futures.
Okay, thank you, Zero. Okay, maybe my second question for Gassi, Ms. Lau. So during the pandemic, I heard that those companies with a good ESG score perform quite well, financially much better than the others. Is it a short-term phenomenon? Also, we keep talking about the social benefit, environmental benefit. Will that be counted as part of the investment return? As Dr. Chopper also mentioned, okay, we need to use a carbon accounting concept, to capture all these benefits. So how do you see the changes that will happen in the future?
Now, I think many statistics, especially in recent years, have shown that, that those that adopt a long-term sustainable investment approach, in the long term, do well, better, as Wallace also mentioned. I mean that has been established. So I don't want to repeat it again. ESG does not necessarily at the expense of investment return. Okay, so it's a very short figure. It's the earning growth of the top tier ESG companies, and the bottom tier. The difference is like 13%. The top tier could be yielding 3%, but the bottom tier talking about minus 9%. So I mean you can. So that is definitely no. ESG does not compromise return. Okay, you can list a lot of statistics. ESG, a pandemic. Of course, a pandemic shows that the world could be suddenly attacked by something that you can never thought of that can last for 2 years, 3 years. So for those companies who really look into their supply chain, how they operate as a company and how they invest the money, especially for institutional investors, because you want to be investing in companies that have long-term return, right? So you may be not seeing the benefit right away, but so I think it will do better. It's not a short-term phenomenon. As I mentioned, it's irreversible. I mean, it really shows, I think the pandemic even confirms again the importance of looking beyond the dollar and cents in the short term. And so if you don't do good to the environment, don't do good to your staff, to the social aspect and proper governance, nobody's going to invest in you in the longer term. Because investors are now raising their voice. If you don't listen to them, they will not follow you. The investors will go somewhere else. So I think this is, so social environmental benefits, that's part of the investment return. Because if you invest in a company for an equity, you invest in a company in all aspects. If you invest in fixed income, for example, doesn't mean you follow an index. That doesn't mean you can't do anything. No, stewardship, engagement, change behavior. So all this is really force us to look really not climate change. As all this really stare you in the eye, and you can't say that they cannot bring benefits.
Okay, thank you. So give us more confidence, okay, to commit to the ESG work. Okay, so another question is for Wallace. Again, about the green financial instrument the bank can provide. I saw quite a number of projects. DBS has worked with the different property developers in some green building projects. But as you can see, like carbon neutral, we have the needs for different new technologies. And some startup might make a contribution in the future. So would it be possible for startup to get access to all these new financial instruments? As you said, a risk evaluation could be one of the considerations.
Sure. Funny you mentioned about real estate projects, because obviously all these projects, they are green qualified. There are second opinions being provided. But if you talk to somebody who is dark green, right, that is actually very passionate about green, some of the dark green investors actually don't believe property projects are green, right? Because if you look at the definition strictly per se, I mean, it has to be quite carbon emission reduction, right, to be qualified as green. But obviously, that's constitute a very small portion of the investor base right now. Aside from the property projects, obviously, we do also provide advisory services and finances to other industries, particularly in the energy, oil and gas, some transportation, as well as high-tech manufacturing, also food and agricultural industry as well. For large companies, right, obviously we do green loans, right, we do a green advisory. On that front, year to date in 2021, DBS has actually done 31 ESG bonds in Asia Pacific, constituting $12 billion US, which were used to finance green and sustainable projects around the region. But for smaller companies, right, SMEs and startups, you said, we also have regular dialogue and discussions with them to see how we can help them. One of the cases that actually I've come across is the small SME in Hong Kong that actually borrowed money to finance some solar panels to be installed up on the roof. It wasn't a big project, so it's actually a very small sum. I think in hundreds of thousands dollars in Hong Kong dollars, right? So it's relatively small, but we were more than happy to support them. And because obviously it is actually of a good cause, it helps carbon emission reduction, and it's the right thing to do. So in our mind, in DBS, there's no projects that are too small, right, on this front, because we believe, when we add small things together, right, we can make a huge difference. So obviously there's still more to be done, but I'm very happy to report that we have actually done transactions, for the SMEs and startups as well.
Thank you, Wallace. Yeah. So I got some questions from the floor online, and also I tried to ask Cyril about this. How to apply for your green fund? Where can they obtain the related information?
You mean how to apply?
So you set up a green fund. So any projects can, apply to.
Understand. Because it is a green fund, we have to avoid the greenwash. Therefore, the project must be first fulfill the sustainable development goals. Secondly, we have to quantify the green impact. We cannot say the project is green and give me the numbers. Show me the figures. It's very important. Show me the figures, how to define the green impact. Because for the green auditor and for the fund manager, I must make sure the project is green. It's very important. And I want to say for the project, I think the use of the sustainable fund is one of the examples to demonstrate how the green finance and also the green project collaborations together. For example, for United Sustainable Fund, we mainly invest into the sustainable lighting system. Why we invest into this project? Because first, it can quantify the green impact in numbers, just I show in the previous section. And also, we can develop a new model, a new business model of this sustainable lighting system. Previously, most of the outdoor lighting system, they use the EMC, the energy management contract, to do the energy saving. However, in mainland, the experience is not so good. It's not very satisfactory because of the very high maintenance costs. Therefore, the passive LED drive model can improve this business model. That's why we can make a profitable profit model. That's the reason why we can generate a return to the investor. And I think this is very important, especially for some green infrastructure. Previously, they only concerned about the green bond, maybe insurance some green bond from the government to finance this green infrastructure. But maybe the green fund can be another choice. We can make some investment into this green infrastructure to make sure the no carbon emissions project can be one of the profitable projects in which we can make well to the world.
Yep. So again, the product features speak for themselves. Low carbon, with green features, and longer life expectancy to avoid any electronic waste. I guess all are good stuff to showcase. So, Dr. Chopper, again, about the product features, about the customer attitude, towards all these carbon footprint. Okay, we had a failure experience many years ago in the UK. There are around, I guess, 30 products. They trying to show their carbon label, calculating the entire life cycle. Okay, but finally the label disappeared because customers really care about the taste and the price of the potato chip they want to buy, not the carbon it generates. Okay, so it seems it's not the time yet to highlight the carbon footprint of those products. So what will you envisage in the future? Will there be a big change?
I do think that there will be a big change. I think we've already had this experience with the pandemic. The pandemic has given everybody a chance to maybe stop and reassess. And that reassessment has brought about some trends, people moving out of cities, living in the suburbs and that kind of lifestyle. But also with respect to ESG, there's greater investment in ESG now. Will people look at carbon footprint labels? I'm not very interested in carbon footprint labels for products because I think the burden is on the customer to make a wise decision. On the other hand, I think that we should have systems in place that the products that are built in first place should be green, right? We don't need a label to say, okay, this is a green, everything should be green on the market shelf, right? So the point being that if you want to compare your product compared to somebody else, how more green you are than the other, then the burden lies on the producer of the product and not the consumer to make that choice. So I think in the future with the younger generation who's very much interested in green and sustainability issues, I think we would see more interest in labels and things like that. But I think in this room, the kind of power we have in terms of financial ability to drive change, I think it's beyond the labels that we're talking. We're talking about much bigger and maybe upstream changes in the supply chains that will result in the consumers making decisions that are much easier for them to take. Thank you.
Okay, maybe due to the time limitation, I just bring up one more question from the floor. Maybe it's up to the panel who can answer this response to this question. Are there any hints or tips about greenwashing? How to distinguish in terms of the green products, or even financial products? Will there be a greenwashing phenomenon can be found in the market?
I can, of course, answer that because that's my job. But my point would be to look at whether the claim of green, something being green has taken into account all of the various stages of the life cycle of the project or a process. So has it included the production, the assembly, the transportation, the use, and the disposal of that product, process, project? And if you are taking that into account, then it's quite rare that you would be able to hide your emissions, which is in another way greenwashing, in my opinion. So yeah, for others, of course.
Yeah, very quickly, in relation to financing, right? I said management time is very important, right? In devising the policies and also on the ongoing monitoring as well as reporting. So for a green bond, for a green loan, for instance, there's usually loan covenants or bond covenants that require companies to adhere to certain monitoring and reporting standards.
I guess in terms of the regulators, I think one way in the financial products, so the SFC, they have an enhanced disclosure requirement. And so we would, they talk about identifying portfolio carbon footprint. So I think they are going into a greater disclosure and talk about risk management. So it will be driven also by the regulators to avoid,
Yes. They also set criteria for ESG fund, right?
Yes.
To set all these standards.
And last sentence, show me the figures. I think we have to follow, just like the financial auditor, just show the figures, the P&L, something like that, how much carbon emissions reduction. Show the figures. Don't just tell, oh, it's a green, it's a sustainable.
Yep, measurable. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Very insightful discussion.
All right, thank you very much once again to all our panelists, and thank you, Dr. William Yu, for moderating the session for us.